Thank you for joining us at this year's Global Conference. To set the stage for our closing plenary, please welcome to the stage CEO of the Milken Institute, Richard DeTizio.
Thank you. This has been an extraordinary few days, and for those of you who've been with us since the beginning, thank you for your ongoing engagement, ideas, and if you're still here on Wednesday afternoon, your stamina. As I walk through the corridors of the conference, people often remark to me how filled with new ideas they are, how excited they are to take some new friends and newly heard innovation back to their workplaces and families. And that is the gift of this event, to get people to see the world in new ways. Maybe see issues from another person's perspective that they hadn't quite considered before. Maybe learn something about themselves and the kind of person they want to be. We are creating an open space for constructive dialogue, hoping people bring their best thinking to the world's worst problems. And it's only now, as we near the end of this journey and catch our breath, that we can appreciate how important these conversations are and how rare they're becoming in an increasingly polarized world. When I welcomed you a few days ago, I noted that the only way we'll be able to tackle the challenges you've heard this week is by finding partners able to work together across the aisle and across the world, despite any perceived differences we think keep us apart. Don't buy into the easy pessimism which can seem so pervasive. Challenge yourself with the harder, brighter path of being an optimist and look for like-minded partners to walk with you on this journey. As you would imagine, this event itself requires extraordinary partnership to bring you each year. And I want to take a moment now to recognize and thank my exceptional colleagues at the Milken Institute and all of our partner organizations who've created this magical experience for us this week. So please give them a round of applause. As you return home, think about what you've learned and what you can do to partner with others on shaping the future you want. Here's a short video of what we've heard from you on partnership over the past few days.
My name is Manar Almanik.
Al Rabel,
Bridget Burns.
Gilman Louis.
Yeah, why not?
In your life, what does partnership mean to you?
Let me think about this. Partnership means...
So you want to partner with people who reflect your weaknesses, not your strengths.
You know, when I think about partnerships, I think of them as long-term relationships based on an alignment of values.
I look for inclusivity, and most important, I look for somebody's openness to learn. While we talk about inclusion and diversity, women still get only 2% of funding compared to the rest of the world.
Si trabajamos juntos, podemos lograrlo todo. If we work together, we can be able to achieve anything that we propose.
Malano Kojapwe, I will go through the fire for you.
There's a phrase called 牙齒當金使. You mean what you say, and you say what you mean.
My one piece of advice to be a good partner is to listen.
Focus on being interested instead of interesting.
You have to be authentic.
By leading with gratitude. You can't go about it on your own.
Be in it for the right reasons. And the legacy won't be tied to how much you make money-wise. It'll be how much did you help people.
I'm from the Central Bank of Nigeria. Milken took us from our different countries, getting all the knowledge I could to have an impact back home when I go back.
This is how we're going to solve the biggest problems, is by bringing people together.
We're all engaged, that we're all active, and that we're all participating in making this world a better place.
I am all about being behind the innovators. I think they have the answers. And I think our community needs to foster support.
Talk to each other, create networks, partnerships.
Partnerships are powerful.
So you've got to line up the capital with the problems and work out ways to do that.
So we need capitalists We need folks who know about education. We need people who know about media and technology, because it takes all of those things working in concert to actually address the gargantuan problems that we face as a society.
There's a real world out there where 99% of people you've never talked to, they're waiting to be engaged with, and they want to be your friend. And if you can connect with them, that's how the world changes.
The people who are dedicated to trying to solve these problems are all around us. And so I think there's hope.
Ciao. Adios.
Please welcome to the stage Executive Chairman of Guggenheim Partners, Alan Schwartz.
Hello, everybody. I will be brief because we're about to have a session that I think everybody will be very, very excited about. And, closing up our last session, it's great to end on such a high note. I just want to share a perspective or two that, I have been fortunate in my career that I have had the chance to interact and learn from a large number of very, very, very smart, knowledgeable people. And I've known a number of people who, on subjects that I'd like to know more about, have an incredible depth of knowledge. I know other people who have an incredible breadth of knowledge and can pull things together. But I've always said, and I'm not just saying it today, I've said it many times in the past, that the two people that I have had the pleasure of interacting with over the years that have incredible breadth and incredible depth on so many subjects, the two people that stand out to me are Michael Milken and Bill Clinton. Incredible range of knowledge with incredible depth and detail and understanding. But more important than that, each of them has been very driven to use that knowledge to improve the lives of people. And that's very important. They're both extraordinarily driven by that. And so they really are impactful human beings that we can all get a chance to learn from. So I think it's going to be a great session, but I want to give you a surprise. I am not going to introduce our speakers. I am going to introduce two extraordinary celebrities who are going to introduce Pa and the President, Sloan and Andy.
One of our next speakers is Michael Milken. And please put your hands together for our 42nd President of the United States, Mr. Bill Clinton.
So, Mr. President, you have three grandchildren, Charlotte, 2014, Aidan, 2016, Jasper, 2019. And one of the few things in life that's better than you ever think it is are grandchildren. Do you get to spend enough time with them?
No. But that's only because there's no such thing as enough time. And I was spoiled during COVID because New York City was hit so hard that Chelsea and my son-in-law Mark and our grandkids moved up to a little guest house next door to our house for the duration of COVID. So I had them every day, and they'd come over in the morning, and my then Jasper was just a 7-month-old toddler, but Charlotte and Aidan would come busting to the house early in the morning, tell us to stop whatever we were doing, and we were going to play. They wrote plays that Hillary and I had roles in. They made up stories. And it was a great experience of my life. So I got severely addicted to spending time with my grandchildren and watching their evolution. So I, by definition, don't have them because they're getting busy now. And as no doubt you have already noticed, at some point, things happen that are way more important than spending time with their grandparents. So then you just have to fit yourself into their schedule, which I'm happy to do. But anyway, I love it. It's been a great joy and a great blessing.
So, Mr. President, we've had a lot of interaction over a long period of time. One of the tough things for me in January of 1993 was knowing that I was older than the President of the United States. So it was, it's a shock. I was 1 month older. But I'd like to take you back 28 years. And this was August 29th, 1996. We set forth on a journey to bring our vision to the country, to keep the American dream alive for all who are willing to work for it, to make our American community stronger, to keep America the world's strongest force for peace, freedom, and prosperity. Do you remember that when you said that?
Yeah, I remember saying that.
That was at the convention, 1996. And
Chicago.
We are so lucky. It was 12 years ago in the exact same room, almost at the exact same time, that President Clinton was here setting the mission and a vision for us at this time. And the words from that day are probably even more poignant today than they were then. Let's take a look at a couple clips from you from 12 years ago.
America's still younger than everybody else in Europe, in Japan, still more diverse, still more open to immigrants, still the best place to start a small business, still the best place for R&D. It's a great mistake to write the epitaph of this country. We just have to get out of denial and back in the future business.
Well, that optimism view you have then, do you still share that optimism today?
Yeah, but I think what I said was wrong with the current moment is also more true today. I mean, anytime you spend all your time trying to settle past grievances or trying to focus on our differences instead of figuring out how to make common cause for a shared future we all want, I think you're in trouble. And I think we have been through a period when, for any number of reasons, the political rewards of grievance-based politics and essentially name-calling and being negative have been so immense that nobody could give them up, knowing all along, including members of the mainstream media, not just the right-wing media, knowing all along that if you didn't give them up, it put our system and our country and our kid and our grandchildren's future in peril. And I basically think that's what this whole shebang has come down to now. It's not tribalism. We are all tribal. We can't build identities except with reference to other people with different identities. And we're in the basketball playoffs now. If you're for one of these teams, you can't be for another. It's a zero-sum game. But there is what I would call inclusive tribalism and divisive tribalism, and the big political benefits have come from divisive tribalism. But it is a potential endless disaster because our capacity, if we cooperate, to solve every challenge we face, including all the things you've done so much wonderful work on over the years, is unlimited. But we can't do it unless we work together and acknowledge that requires us to work. Say, look, you know, we have all these differences, but what we have in common is so much more important. What do you say we work on it? That, I think, is the key question facing not just the United States, but so many countries in the world today.
So over the years, you have done so many things to build what I would call the social capital of our country, pulling us together. And when we look at it from a financial standpoint, the GDP of our country, the gross national product, which is the largest in the world, is around 27 trillion. Our debt is around 34 trillion. The total financial assets of our country that you measure financially, real estate, factories, etc., investments, is around 139 trillion. But all of these pale in comparison to what is the estimated social and human capital of the country that you've worked most of your life to build: education, healthcare, etc. And I think the tribalism you're talking about here is the risk to that social capital you spent your life building from that standpoint. And so let's maybe start with the first element that you spent a lot of time, and that's healthcare. Most of the people in this room, Mr. President, don't remember. They're too young to remember in 1995 when we tried to accelerate medical research and said, okay, if there's a treatment that works, we don't need to go phase 3. Let's get it to cancer patients. There was one leader in the world that signed into law fast track for cancer patients, and that was yourself. And probably the thing... And many of the people are too young to remember, but if you want to know why did we have a vaccine in a year, not in 10 years, we had a march in 1998 in Washington. 500,000 people in Washington and around the country came together, and they had been trying for decades to increase the NIH budget. And when this march was over, within 2 months, you signed into law the doubling of the NIH budget, something that could not be done for 2 decades, and the incremental benefits to our society of what you put in motion now totals $500 billion. So I want to thank you. Every single person on the planet has benefited from that decision you made. So through the Clinton Health Access Initiative, through others' initiatives, you've long focused on improving public health in the United States and globally. What are some of the most important lessons you have learned that can make us more effective in creating solutions?
Well, first of all, there are problems that you know with the tools at hand you can solve. Then there are problems you know with the tools at hand you can alleviate but not solve. And then there are those that you don't yet know how to deal with because there hasn't been enough medical breakthrough. So the first thing you got to do is figure out what kind of issue are you dealing with. And when I started working on AIDS, for example, we made a couple of decisions. First, that I wasn't Bill Gates. I didn't have all the money in the world. But I did know a lot of people, and I could put together groups to help solve problems. So the first decision we made was we would not go into a country unless the government welcomed us. But we would not decline to go into a country just because I disagreed with the government on other political issues, that if they were willing to protect the integrity of public health work and were willing not to ask us to do anything that was corrupt, I would pretty much go anywhere. And I cut a deal with the United States government, and George Bush was president, but the other, Obama followed it, everybody did, that I never did anything they didn't know I was doing, and they didn't object to what I was doing as long as it was all transparent. And then we just started working on ways to do things faster, cheaper, and better. The first thing we had to do is to realize that we had a traditional system which had served America and the Western world very well of giving a fairly extended patent for the development of new medicines because it requires a lot of advance money to develop this medicine, and you've got to give people a chance to recover their investment. But in the case of AIDS, it put us in a terrible position because there were so many people who had it around the world, and people were dying like flies, and we needed to do something to speed it up. So in the middle of all this, there's this huge argument going on about whether poor people can be trusted to take a drug they have to take 3 times a day, and will the pharmaceutical companies move out of this if we buy generic drugs? There were all these issues. And Nelson Mandela and I found ourselves working, and it was a joy. He still had more than a decade to live then, and we had a great time together. But we were trying to put together a system that would, in effect, address these cases with more aid, but also not allowing the patent laws to be so severe that huge numbers of people would die before we could ever get any medicine into country A, B, or C. And there was an exception in the international patent arena for such cases, so you could save lives. So I just kept trying to work with everybody and figuring out ways to do things faster, cheaper, or better. And we came up with, that was our sort of mantra with CHI, the Clinton Health Access Initiative, that we would find a way to do things faster, cheaper, and better. And we, even now, after all these years, about 30 million lives have been saved, and over half the people on earth with getting AIDS medicine get it from contracts we negotiated, and about 80% of all the children on earth get it. And all we did was to figure out how to maximize production. We helped the generic drug companies, primarily in India and South Africa, become more efficient. We worked on supply chains. We worked on all the stuff that I never dreamed I would be involved in when I started trying to help on AIDS, and all we were doing is saying, give us more money. And I think it's really one reason public health has gotten so much more money is that people know that it has dramatically improved its efficiency. And I think you had a lot to do with that too, and how we spent the money and how we make investment decisions. But I think now it's going to be much harder because of the challenge of climate change, the overlap of health and climate problems, and after years and years and years of public health being the only basically adequately funded program, I think there's a lot of competition for other money and a lot of question about whether this new sort of divisive nationalism is going to undermine a commitment to larger public health. So I think you're probably like me, you keep wondering when we get to quit. And the answer is never. I mean, you got to show up. And I think, so anyway, that's what I've learned. You can't quit, and you got to keep looking for answers, and you can't do it without a cooperation position, and the cooperation between the private sector, the public sector, and the civil society, and cooperation across lines that would otherwise divide. If you want to save lives, it's got to become your number one priority.
So, Mr. President, for 31 years at the Milken Institute, we have put up slides reminding everyone that 50% of all economic growth can be traced to public health and medical research. And the partnership and the initiative that you launched in conjunction with President Bush, the people that had the most incidence of AIDS and HIV in the world were sub-Saharan Africa. You have countries that at one time median age was 15. A woman had a 95% chance of passing AIDS on to their child when it was born. And the work that you did, an initiative, today that percentage of passing it on is now 2%. And so the children of the world, now have been born without AIDS, and we're about to see for the first time in history the doubling of life expectancy in one generation. And that partnership, those initiatives you launched, changed the world, and we're seeing it today. And today there's the potential that if you have HIV or AIDS, you might only have to take 3 pills a year to bring it under control. So you talked about initiative and staying with it and determination. Let's see another clip from 2012 on the future of America. President Clinton, 2012.
A lot of you got here into these chairs because of your extraordinary abilities, because of your persistence, because of whatever. But every single one of us had somebody, some way that helped us. We had a teacher, or somebody that gave us a job in the summertime, or somebody that helped us get into a university, or somebody that gave us our first job out of school. Something. We all had that.
So you talked here about a mentor, and one of the other initiatives you really focused on is education. And so I thought I'd put up a quote from 2 people spanning 30 years. One, a person you've just mentioned on the stage, Nelson Mandela. Let's see what he had to say on the day that he was sworn in as the leader of South Africa. The importance of education. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And on this stage a few days ago was Elon Musk, and let's see what he said about education. You can learn almost anything for free on the internet. For example, MIT has all of its lessons online. Starlink might be the #1 technology that improves the people's standard of living and around the world. So let's start. Can you think of a mentor, a teacher that had to, put you on and gave you the energy as a young boy?
Yeah, I had, first of all, my 6th grade teacher remained my friend till she died at 90. And I was a governor then. And once a year, she used to come and listen to me speak, and she was frail and in a body brace. But on the last day of my career in elementary school, she said, I can't tell whether you're going to become governor or a permanent prisoner. And I said, why? She said, it really is entirely dependent on whether you learn when to listen and when to talk. but you keep getting them mixed up. So she had a big impact on me, and I loved her very much. I had an 8th grade science teacher who taught me the most important lesson I've ever known. He was, Arkansas teachers didn't make any money. They were the second poorest paid in the country. So he was an ex-coach. And a lot of those guys got a reputation for being dumb, and they just hung around to get in their retirement. This guy was really smart. And his wife was my algebra and geometry teacher. So he said, kids, this is the last day of school. 5 years from now, you're not going to remember anything you learned in 8th grade science. You won't remember anything. If you don't remember anything else, remember this. I guess I should say, he was not a conventionally handsome man. He wore Coke bottle glasses when there were no contacts. He had a beak nose, and he chewed cheap cigars in a plastic cigar holder. And he kept getting heavier, and he couldn't afford to buy new clothes. So he was keep coming up. And he knew this. And his wife was beautiful, and so was his sister-in-law, who was our history teacher. So anyway, he said, but listen, this has been 63 years. You remember anything anybody told you 63 years ago? He said, you won't remember anything you learned in 8th grade science. If you don't remember anything else, remember this. Every single morning, I get up, I go into my bathroom, I throw water on my face, put my shaving home cream on, I shave myself and wipe it all off, and I look in that mirror and I say, Vernon, you're beautiful. He said, you remember this, every single person wants to believe they are beautiful, that they matter. If you remember that one thing, it'll take you a long way. Verbatim, word for word, that's what he told me 63 years ago. So I think you could say he had an influence on me. And it's still pretty good advice, isn't it? You think of that. How far have you ever gotten telling other people how ugly they are? So we should remember that, all of us.
So education of children in America and around the world, I know this is an area you've been very focused and the Clinton Foundation on. And for people, you can go Google it. We spoke about CHI, the Clinton Health Access Initiative, which in fact Alan Schwartz chairs today. But the Clinton Foundation really had 3 areas of focus, and if you go to the website, you'll see them. And one of them is really education. And when you step back and look at these areas of education and health equity, today, as you know, the country has changed dramatically in demographics, and only 9.5% or less of Americans today that were not born here were born in Europe, compared to 75% 60 years ago. So getting our diverse population into clinical trials is important. But how have you looked over the years at education and the challenges we've had in education over the years? And let's talk, you've had so many initiatives in this area, getting books to kids so they could read, etc. As you think back, what were the most effective in terms of education, and maybe what were the least effective things you worked on?
Well, first I should say that before I became president, I was a governor for 12 years. And that's the longest I ever had a job in my life, till I went to work for my foundation. And I spent an enormous amount of time in the classroom. And when I took office, a national expert had said we had the worst schools in the country. And we had 370 school districts in a little state with only 2.5 million people. When I left office, same guy said that the most improved schools in America were in Arkansas and South Carolina. So I've cared about this a lot. My daughter just gave an award to her elementary school principal, who she stayed in touch with all this time, and she loves this woman. So what did I learn? I think, first of all, it's a mistake to assume that any people can't learn, that well over 90% of the people can learn well over 90% of what they need to know to triumph in the world. Secondly, they'll learn more if it's interesting. So you have to really devote a serious amount of time to make the learning enterprise interesting and worth the time. And I think that's important. And thirdly, I think that there have to be an enormous efforts made to keep people in school through high school, and then to make interchangeable the avenues after high school, whether they're at four-year universities or community colleges or in various vocational efforts, so that we can establish a flowing system of lifetime learning that all of us will be able to access. That's what I think is most important. But the most important thing is not to give up on kids before they get started. And then the second most important thing is not to let people use economic and social and other disadvantages as an excuse not to learn. You know, the last thing I'll say, there was more than 20 years ago, way more than 20 years ago now, when I was a governor and reading all this material, there was a fascinating study done by the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton. And they studied all these kids, and this was back when the first drug gangs were prominent and all the violence was going on in the 80s and people were feeling despair. And they studied all these kids who had done well in spite of everything. And I'll never forget the thing the profile that made the biggest impression on me was a young black man who was one of four brothers. Both his parents were drug addicts. His grandmother took him in. She couldn't possibly manage them all. And ironically, they live in Harlem, where my office is today. But this kid was going to college, and his three siblings were in prison. So the study studied a dozen people like this, from rich to poor, but somehow they all did well. And what the guy concluded, who did the study, was that there were no systems that solved all problems. So you had to have, for people who are highly at risk, at least one person who really cared about this young man or woman at a critical point in their lives. And this kid was going to college while his three siblings were in prison, because when he was in grade school, he went by this man's newsstand on the streets of New York every day, going to and from school. And the guy made him show him his homework when he came home at night, and made him prove when he went to school that he'd done the homework. And he was the only male influence. But he said, And he was self-aware, the student was. He said, this guy cared whether I lived or died. And my older siblings, they didn't know that. And he said, I'm convinced that they were as smart as me and they'd have done well if they just had one person who cared whether they lived or died. Interesting.
So, Mr. President, one of the things you launched in your education effort, one of the greatest logos, now I don't know if you thought of it or someone else thought of it on your foundation team, but it was too small to fail. So as you might know, the most important period of time in education, the highest rate of return is 0 to 6. By the time you're 15, you have to invest 3 times as much money to get the same results. And by the time you're 25 and by the time you're 30, you have to invest 10 times to get the same results. And Heckman won a Nobel Prize for this work. And at one time, I was the largest investor, and we had 2,200 early child care. So I read this thing, too small to fail. Now, I don't know if you create all the logos or not, but early language, learning from birth to prepare young children, almost 60%, when you go to that site and study it, of children start kindergarten unprepared, behind their peers, critical language and reading skills. And you've now 1.4 million children. You've provided books to their families and 160,000 parents, reminders, texts. Now, was that your idea, too small to fail?
No. Lord knows I wish I could take credit for it. I love it. It's one of my favorite projects. But it came out of work that my daughter, Chelsea, leads with the team of our people who work with preschoolers. But it's been an incredible experience. I mean, we have all kinds of partnerships that we work with and try to help succeed. But my favorite, I think, is the Cohen-operated Laundry Association. Now think of this, that an enormous percentage of lower income parents, they don't have a washer or a dryer at home. They have to go to the laundry. And most of the time, if they got little kids, they got to drag them along with them. And it's just a lot of dead time. So we got with the Cohen-operated laundry folks, and they thought it was very exciting, and they thought they'd improve their business if they create a learning center in every laundry. I've got one about 2 miles from my house in Chappaqua, New York. And so, anyway, this has been one of the most exhilarating things we have ever done. And we've got them in juvenile courts in Milwaukee. We've got them all over the country in all kinds of different settings. And I think it's really works because it helps a lot of them to, in effect, make up for lost time early. As you point out, it's a lot easier to do it when they're 3 or 4 than later. My daughters and her friends did that, not me.
Well, we're going to have to get the addresses of some of these coin-based laundries. Maybe we can come in and see it at work and reproduce it. It's interesting. In Singapore, the #1 extracurricular activity for kids is robotics and coding. Coding to make their robots move. And what you've done with early childhood education is so fantastic. I'd like to switch. When you talk about partnership, one of the things you've done over the years is create these partnerships, and it's been amazing. And one of the ones that was most effective was with the American Heart Association. and working with schools and 30 million children leading healthier lives. And how did you and the Heart Association team up?
I didn't die when I had a heart problem. So, you know, in 2004, I had my heart kind of seized up on me, and I avoided a heart attack by the narrowest of margins, and then I went to my hospital, Columbia Presbyterian, and I had quadruple heart bypass, and I didn't have an option. And it was crazy. I was both saved with and almost killed by the fact that I disciplinedly ran a lot when I was in the White House and then afterward. So when I should have noticed when I got out that I couldn't run any distance anymore. But if I get about 3/4 of a mile, couldn't breathe, and I'd stop and walk and everything would be fine, and I'd go run again. And I should have known I had blockage, and dumb me, I didn't. So the nice thing was I lost a lot more weight for a lot less effort than I had ever made before. I was really trim for my daughter's college graduation, and I nearly killed myself. But afterward, I wanted to do something, and the American Heart Association contacted me, and I said, look, I want to do something, but I don't want to make public service announcements and all that, something that'll just be gone with the wind. I said, let's set up something that will systematically change the way kids are raised and reduce the likelihood of type 2 diabetes and its attendant consequences, one of which is a lot of heart attacks and strokes. And that was, at the time, probably the biggest public health problem young people had in America, type 2 diabetes. And it was diabetes and its consequences were claiming at the time over 20% of all the Medicaid spending, and yeah, that's the government's program for poor people. It was horrible. So anyway, we did, and we got all the major soft drink companies led by Pepsi and Coke, but a lot of others too, and they joined together, and with no tax, no soda pop tax, no nothing, they agreed. We did get a waiver from the Justice Department, from the Antitrust Division, so we didn't seem to be too much collusion. And they helped us set up a program that cut calories going to kids in schools from drinks by 90%. 90% without literally no laws, no taxes, no nothing. I went to see him, I'll never forget, I said, you know, I know you guys have to sell stuff and you got to make money with these vending machines in schools, but if what you're doing gives you a lot more customers that have their legs cut off at the knee by the time they're 35, it's not a very smart investment. And you may think that's a joke, but when we had Katrina hit the Gulf Coast, I was at an unbelievable black housing development in Biloxi that had been built by a good friend of Hillary's and mine, Dorothy Height, who was head of the National Council of Negro Women until she died on the job at 98, you know, with her boots on. But anyway, she built this housing unit, and they had all just paid off 30-year mortgages when Katrina came. So they found themselves homeless and in a fight with the insurance companies about whether it was covered. But the spokesperson they picked was this beautiful, articulate woman in her mid-30s who was already confined to a wheelchair because she'd lost one leg that had been cut off at the knee because of the rampant spread of type 2 diabetes, which is the kind you get from living, not the kind you're born with. So Anyway, this is a long-winded way of saying this is a really big deal. And you have to find partners like the Cohen-Operated Laundry Association. You have to find partners like the people who came to help us after Katrina, who started helping. And we have to prevent these things from happening because if we can't keep doing this. We have a negative population growth rate. And a lot of people are in categories where the life expectancy is not increasing. So if you get to be my age, and Michael's age, we're in a sector that's as high as if we were Japanese. But the death rate of Americans under 65 has increased. And since we all know that the most important thing we can do is make sure every person as young as possible has a fully loaded AR-15, we're killing a lot of people at a young age under the guise of their freedom. And so, which I hate, but anyway. But this is out of balance, and we have to do something about it, and I think the earlier the better.
So many people might wonder, where does your energy, persistence, and everything come from? It was December 31st, 1993. You had not been president for a year, and I'm in Las Vegas for New Year's at a Barbra Streisand concert at the MGM. And this was pre-pay-per-view. And when the concert ends and we're celebrating New Year's, there's this woman with more energy than anyone I ever met, who's, after the show's over, she's been there, she's up dancing, etc. We're in the dressing room. And she's talking to Lori and my wife and myself, and Barbara, and Quincy Jones was with us, with such unbelievable energy. And that woman was your mother. December 31st, 1993. The same woman that went to New Orleans to nursing school with her energy. And 1 week later, I read that she passed away from cancer. Talk to us a little bit about your relationship with your mom.
Well, first of all, my mother fell in love with Barbra Streisand. Late in life.
So did my mother, I want you to know.
What? And so they became friends at my inauguration. And I've got this picture of them walking off the stage, holding hands from behind. And Barbra Streisand somehow loved my mother. And she called her every week, once a week, every week, without fail, till she died. And so for the rest of my life, anytime somebody said something negative about her and my position about being a temperamental genius or whatever, and I would always say, well, until you're a genius, you shouldn't attack her, because I knew how good she'd been to my mother. And my mother was a terrific human being, and she grew up, you know, in a fairly poor family in Hope, Arkansas, and had a tough life. And her father, my father, her first husband, died in a car wreck before I was born. Then my stepfather, whom I genuinely loved, was an interesting man, but he drank too much, and he caused a lot of trouble for her. And she just kept surviving. She was widowed 3 times. And she was married 4 times. And her last husband was a wonderful man who remained my friend until he died. But I'll never forget seeing her. I was trying to call my mother, and the day she died was the first time I had gotten her on the phone, which she was in Las Vegas the whole week. I said, "Where have you been?" And she said, "Son, I'm having a good time. I didn't come out here to sit by the phone." And she knew she was dying. She was a nurse anesthetist. They tried to get her to take some various kinds of transplants because the cancer had spread from her breast to her bones. And she said, "Nope, I'm too old. I shouldn't take any of this technology and any of these opportunities away from young people. I've had a great life. I'm going to ride it out." And so I tried to get her to come to the White House for what I knew would be her only Christmas at the White House. She said, "You know, Bill, I'd really like to do that, but I have got to go to Vegas to Streisand's concert." She said, "That's my number one priority. Now, if you can get me home, so I get there, I'll be there." I said, "Mother, I'll take you home." So she came and I flew her home. And we're sitting in her house on December the 27th. And I said, and she was writing a book about her life. And she knew, by then she was getting 2 transfusions a day to stay alive. So she looked like $1 million, but she was actually weak, I said, what am I going to do if you don't finish this book? She looked at me and she said, "You're going to finish it, of course." But she said, "I know you. Do not, it is my book. So you can't change it unless you find an honest, factual mistake, or unless you think I have been too mean to somebody who's still alive." I don't like being mean to people who are still alive. You don't seem so mean if they're already dead. You're just telling the truth. So those are your instructions. She was amazing.
Well, Mr. President, my father died of cancer in '79 of melanoma. Your mom died from what was a complication of breast cancer. And what you did in '98 and set into motion, both of them today would have had longer lives. And we thank you for that, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you for attending the 2024 Milken Institute Global Conference. We hope you've enjoyed your time with us over these past few days and look forward to hearing about your experience. Be sure to tag us at #MIGlobal as you continue to share with your networks. Join us now for our closing concert featuring John Fogerty happening in the Oasis Pavilion. Thank you.